Hello, listeners, from Roy Damari Sam, and welcome to this fourth broadcast of a series of 5 devoted to what we can learn from the Green City project of the Russian city of Ekaterinburg. I remind you that is on the Ural Mountains, not very high despite it being a mountain, and it is an industrial city overcrowded with cars, and they have a major project underway about which we have written what you might call an academic article describing the experience, but which has been turned into this series of 5 broadcasts and also a written version for a North American audience. Now, furniture plays an important role in the total context, this multi-dimensional project to do with making the city both healthier and more attractive to its residents and its visitors. In principle, citizens are to be encouraged to walk or jog along trails and in parks, or even just to stroll in the streets. But they need places to sit down. That might be just to tie up their shoelaces or eat a sandwich, or sit and admire the view, simply take a breather if they're doing exercises. And in the right climate, there might even be some cross-country ski trails with huts to warm up near cities. So we're going to put some furniture, or replace some furniture, or expand some furniture in the open spaces of Ekaterinburg. So we're going to call them outdoor furniture. Now, wood, as distinct from steel, aluminium, or plastic, is the obvious choice for outdoor furniture, all the more so in Russia, where they have an awful lot of wood. Wooden furniture fits well into parks and woodlands, and even in streets. It's kind of softer in appearance than metal, and of course wood can be stained, painted, sanded, refurbished. Now, there are some guidelines which have to be followed with regard to urban wooden furniture, and I'm just going to mention a few dimensions of those guidelines. Perhaps the first is that they have to be aesthetically attractive. The furniture has to fit into the architectural and artistic patterns of the space within the urban environment and fit harmoniously into the environment, giving it an attractive and finished look. That requires, of course, clever people who know about looks, the looks of furniture, the looks of buildings and so on. And we're talking here about furniture such as flower beds, rubbish bins, benches in the city centre streets of Ekaterinburg. We're also talking about actually sculptures in the parks or the entrances to parks. Next, we have to worry about safety. So we don't have sharp edges for a start, or round. We need round corners rather than angular corners. Furniture needs to be the right height and overall size, and it must be made of a minimum number of parts, and certainly no unnecessary parts. There's a limit to how much you can make it fancy. Now, functionality is key, of course. A bench, for example, has to be convenient to sit on and have the right number of places, 3 or 4, whatever. If it's a waste paper basket, it needs to be easy to use and simple to empty. A certain durability and reliability is needed for the furniture. Unfortunately, there are still acts of vandalism, and there is a natural wear from the weather. Actually, you have to be able to deal with graffiti as well, basically remove it or paint it over. I would mention versatility. It needs to have a simple installation, probably requiring concrete footings and a modular construction. There's a whole field here of how to design and build the furniture, which happens to be, by the way, one of the specialities of several companies in Ekaterinburg, given, not least, that the city is in the middle of a forest. And then finally, we could say practicality. We need to ensure that the furniture is easy to maintain and repair, maybe resand and repaint. Now, if it's made of wood, you have to decide what wood and how best to use it. Now, the key wood here is pine. But it's not just any old pine. It is what they call the heartwood of the tree, as distinct from the sapwood The heartwood is hard and the sapwood is soft. And this heartwood of pine provides a common and inexpensive material for outdoor furniture. It has a loose structure but with a high resin content, and that leads to low swelling coefficient. It's resistant to biological corrosion and it can be easily machined. But that's not the end of the story. Actually, the resin can be a nuisance. You need to have this wood heat treated, and that provides a high quality material able to solve all sorts of issues which previously could only be dealt with by special types of wood or expensive coatings. Lots of species can be heat treated, but it's pine we're focusing on here. The heat treatment involves obviously a great big oven into which you take the wood to a high temperature. I'm not sure what temperature, but it would certainly be high enough to drive off water content, including the sap, and burn off the resin. When the moisture content of wood is reduced, and it would be reduced by a lot, by at least 50% and maybe 90%, that would leave a material which is lighter. The surface is actually denser, and there are cellular structure changes. The result is far less warping. Now, heat treatment also removes wood sugars. That's a nutrient for microorganisms, and if you burn that off, the attraction of the wood to wood-eating organisms is much reduced. And the resin from any coniferous tree, such as pine, it flows out or is burnt out. Now, pine produces much resin as a defense mechanism against damage, but at the same time, leakage of resin in a bench, for example, is extremely unwelcome. Now, sap is burnt off, and that's important when pine is used for furniture, because sap, if it comes out, will cause the paint to peel. Now, the colour and appearance change throughout the volume of the wood when it's heat treated. The wood acquires a golden brown colour right the way through, so that when you saw or sand the wood, there is no noticeable change in the colour. I mentioned earlier the issue of sculptures. There's a great example in Ekaterinburg in what they call the Park of the Russian Foresters. You've got some wooden sculptures there, 19 tall wooden sculptures, and they're linked to the history of what are called the Riffian Mountains. Now, Riffian is the old name for the Urals. Each figure reflects an aspect of the history or myths of the Urals. So that's great. It keeps alive the culture and the history, but it must be added here that these sculptures actually date back to before the Green City project, but they will inspire new creations. When you look at streets, they are not just a means of getting from A to B, providing shops and eating places, but they can provide a pleasant walk with works of art, seating for taking a break, trees for shade. Indeed, a street can be, and it's a major objective, a destination in its own right. They have even more potential uses of streets. The art can reflect history and culture. The street can serve teachers and their children. If the walk is pleasant, the street can serve as a kind of walking school bus. Here in Switzerland, you might have heard the term pedibus. So parents can accompany children to their primary school in an interesting setting. It brings the street to life. You also have to think of a street as being useful in an emergency. So street art can serve as gathering and evacuation points, as apparently they did in the New Orleans flooding, while benches can also contain emergency supplies. They do in Japan already. And as for bus shelters, they can serve as warming huts in inclement weather. My goodness, they have some inclement weather in the Urals. So as you might have gathered if you've listened to this broadcast, outdoor furniture is itself a complex topic, but it's vital for the well-being of a modern city. Next week I'll deliver the fifth short talk on this green project, and I will consider mainly the management and administration processes to make the project work.